What do you do when you realize your entire relationship was just a cruel game designed to humiliate you? You don't cry, you get even. I've spent weeks gathering the secrets he thought were safe, and tonight I'm dismantling his social standing piece by piece. Watch how I take control. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to the exact moment the floor disappeared beneath my feet, and I had to decide, in the dark, in the cold, in complete and utter silence, who I was going to be when morning came. You need to understand something about me first. My name is Eli Voss. I am 34 years old. I have designed 31 buildings across 9 countries. I won the Pritzker Prize at 31, the youngest recipient in the award's history. The New York Times once called me the architect who builds cathedrals for the future. I have never once in my adult life allowed someone to see me fall apart. Never. Until Liam. Liam Ashford walked into my life at a rooftop fundraiser 18 months ago. He was wearing a navy suit, laughing at something one of his friends said, and when he turned and our eyes met across that crowded terrace, I felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He had that kind of presence, the kind that fills a room without trying. Confident, magnetic, the kind of man who makes you forget, just for a second, that you built your entire life around never needing anyone. I didn't pursue him. I never pursue anyone. But he pursued me with a patience and an intelligence that I found genuinely disarming. He knew my work. He quoted an essay I'd written about liminal architecture in 2019, a piece that barely anyone outside academic circles had read. He asked thoughtful questions. He was curious about me, not about my awards, not about my portfolio, but about me, what I loved, what I feared, what kept me up at night. I should have known then. Curiosity that precise doesn't come naturally. It comes from research. But I didn't. I was charmed. For the first time in a very long time, I let my guard down. Slowly, yes, I wasn't reckless about it, but I let him in. By month 4, he had moved into my penthouse. My penthouse. 43rd floor, southeast corner. I designed it myself. Every line, every material, every angle of light. It is the most personal space I have ever created. It is me rendered in glass and steel and Brazilian hardwood. And I let him move into it. I let him move into me. Now, the night everything changed, it was a Tuesday in early November. I remember the cold, the particular sharpness of it, the way it had started pressing against the windows in that insistent way that says winter is not asking anymore. I'd had a long day. Structural review on a commission in Zurich had run 4 hours over schedule, and I'd come home with a headache behind my right eye that I'd tried to walk off on the way up in the elevator. Liam was still awake when I got in. He kissed me at the door, poured me a glass of water, and asked about my day. He was perfect at that. The small gestures, the attentiveness. Even now, even knowing what I know, I have to admit, the performance was immaculate. We went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep almost immediately. And then at some point in that deep, formless dark between 2 and 3 in the morning, I woke up. The bed was empty beside me. The city glowed through the glass walls, that peculiar orange-gray of a metropolis refusing sleep. I lay still for a moment, listening, and I heard it. A sound from the direction of the balcony, muffled. The glass door was slightly ajar. Laughter. Low. Private. The kind of laughter that belongs to people who think no one else is listening. I should have turned over and gone back to sleep. That would have been the reasonable thing. A man can laugh on a phone call at 2 in the morning without it meaning anything sinister. But something in me, some quiet, watchful part that I'd trained to stay alert through years of navigating difficult clients and competitive firms and a kind of professional backstabbing that happens at altitude, that part of me did not move. That part of me went very still, the way an animal goes still when it senses something in the air. I got up without making a sound. I have designed buildings with acoustic precision for 20 years. I know how sound travels. I know where to stand in a room to hear something clearly without being seen. I am, in a sense, professionally trained to understand spaces. I positioned myself 12 feet from the balcony door, and I listened. Liam's voice drifted in, lazy and loose with the kind of ease that comes from certainty, from the absolute certainty that you are alone. No, he has no idea, Marcus, none. He thinks I'm in love with him. The man literally designed our bedroom. He designed it for me. Do you know how much that's worth? He's put my name on the guest list for every major architectural society event in the city. I've shaken hands with 3 city councilmen in the last 2 months because of him. That's the thing about Eli Voss, Marcus. Everyone always says he's untouchable, the ice architect, the man who doesn't let anyone in. You remember the bet, Ashford can't crack him, nobody can. And here I am, 8 months in his bed and 6 months in his professional circles. Who's untouchable now? Yeah, don't worry about the drawings. He signed off on the Harlow development without even reading the fine print. His name is on the environmental compliance documentation, his firm's letterhead. He thinks it was a standard pro bono consultation. He's a brilliant man, Marcus. Brilliant men are always the easiest to blind. You aim at their ego, and they walk right into it. When do I get the other half of the payout? I stood in the dark of my own bedroom, in the space I had designed down to the grain of the wood beneath my feet, and I felt something happen inside my chest that I can only describe as a structural failure. You know that moment in engineering, the moment a load-bearing element goes? It isn't dramatic, not at first. There's a sound sometimes, a crack, low and final. And then, silence. And then, in the silence, everything that depended on that element begins, slowly, to shift. That is what happened to me. Not tears. I want to be clear about that. There were no tears. There was a crack, and then silence. And then very slowly, very quietly, a shift. Blueprint. I walked back to the bed. I lay down. I closed my eyes. And I thought. I have been in rooms with some of the most formidable minds in the world. I have sat across negotiating tables from developers who would happily bury your career to save a fraction of their margin. I have navigated lawsuits, creative disputes, and the particular violence of artistic theft, which is the worst kind because it steals the thing that matters most. None of that prepared me for this. And yet, all of it had sharpened me. All of it had given me something that most people who have been hurt the way I was being hurt would not have. Most people, when they discover they have been betrayed, react. They confront, they accuse, they give the person who wronged them the one thing that person should never have: warning. I am an architect. I don't react, I design. The question was not, what do I do? The question was, what do I build? I lay in that bed for 3 hours. Liam came back inside sometime around 3:30. I heard him set his glass down. I heard him slide into bed. I felt the warmth of him beside me, and I thought in a very detached way, you have no idea what is already in motion. Not because anything was in motion yet, but because I had decided, and for me, a decision is a foundation poured. Everything that comes after is just construction. In the morning, I kissed him at the kitchen counter. I laughed at something he said. I told him I had a site visit in the afternoon and I'd be home late. He said he'd order dinner. I smiled the whole way down in the elevator. Then I got into my car and I sat very still for about 90 seconds, and the smile disappeared, and I thought, Harlow Development, environmental compliance. His name is Marcus. And I went to work. The first thing I did was call my personal attorney, Diane Park. Diane has been my legal counsel for 11 years. She's sharp, expensive, and deeply discreet. I told her I needed to review every document that had passed through my firm in the last 18 months, carrying my signature or my letterhead. I told her I needed it done quietly, internally, without alerting anyone in my office. She didn't ask why. That's why I pay her what I pay her. The second thing I did was call my IT director and have him run a quiet audit of all remote access on my firm's server for the past 8 months, specifically any access tied to guest credentials I had granted to Liam's company. Liam ran a property development consultancy. I had given him access to certain project files at his request, something that had seemed, at the time, both professional and intimate, a gesture of trust. I sat with that gesture it cost me for exactly 4 minutes. Then I moved on. By the end of that first day, I had a preliminary picture. It was worse than I had thought, and I had thought it was fairly bad. The Harlow Riverside development, a mixed-use urban regeneration project I had been approached to consult on 8 months ago, had significant environmental concerns. A remediation assessment that should have flagged contaminated waterway on a portion of the site had been quietly buried. Liam's consulting firm had been the intermediary between the developer and 3 regulatory submissions. My firm's name appeared on a covering letter that essentially vouched for the integrity of the environmental review process. I had signed that letter. I remembered it, vaguely, as a courtesy document. Something Liam had told me was standard acknowledgement of consultation engagement. He'd brought it to me at the end of a long evening when I was tired, with a glass of wine and a smile. I had signed it. My name, my reputation, my firm's integrity, leverage. That was what the bet was really about. Not taming me, not the social circles. Those were bonus prizes. The real prize was my professional credibility used as a smokescreen for a fraudulent development deal. The romance was the delivery mechanism. I want to tell you that the coldness I felt in that moment was anger. It wasn't. Anger would have been a luxury. Anger would have meant I still cared enough to feel it hot. What I felt was clarity. The particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping you misunderstood and accept that you understood exactly right. When the last soft tissue between you and the truth calcifies and you are left with something clean and hard and very, very still. I closed the files. I went home. I ordered dinner with Liam. I asked about his day. He told me, at length, with what I can now recognize as the practiced warmth of a man who has been performing for so long he may have partially forgotten it's a performance. I listened to every word. 2 weeks compressed, a montage of small sounds, coffee cups, phone calls, footsteps, the soft chime of emails, the particular click of a pen signing a document, all of it deliberate, all of it quiet. I became, for exactly 14 days, the most attentive, most present, most apparently devoted version of myself that Liam had ever seen. I cooked. I made reservations at restaurants he'd mentioned in passing. I bought tickets to a gallery opening he'd expressed interest in 3 weeks earlier, a detail most people would have forgotten, and I had never forgotten because I do not forget the details of people I care about. And that was perhaps the cruelest joke in all of this. That the attentiveness he had used to seduce me was the same attentiveness that now helped me dismantle him. I am what I am. I cannot stop paying attention to things. It is not in my architecture. While I was being the perfect partner, here is what was also happening. Diane had identified 7 documents, 7, in which my credentials had been used in ways I had not authorized. 2 were straightforward signature fraud. My electronic signature had been applied to documents I had never reviewed, using a copy from a lease agreement I had signed at Liam's request 6 months prior. The other 5 were in a gray zone, technically authorized by me under circumstances carefully engineered to obscure their true purpose. I passed everything to a forensic accounting firm my attorney had used before. Their brief was simple. Find the money. Follow the money. Every architect knows the money is in the foundation. You want to know what a building is really made of? You look at what's underground, out of sight, invisible to anyone who knows to look. They found it in 11 days. The full structure of the Harlow deal, 2 offshore subsidiaries, a directing partner named Marcus Reeve, a name I now knew from that night on the balcony. Liam's consultancy fees, $420,000 paid across 8 months, and the value of my firm's compliance cover. In the developer's internal communications, it was assessed at, "I want you to sit with this," $2.3 million. That was the going rate, apparently, for the professional standing of Eli Voss. I had been sold for $2.3 million. And the bet, the original bet, the wager about taming the untouchable architect, that had been the opening gambit, the key to the door. Prove it could be done, get access to the inner circle of my professional life, and then use that access for the financial play. I was never the prize. I was the lock. I had one final piece to put in place. I needed documentation of the original deception, the bet, the deliberate seduction, the knowing exploitation of a personal relationship for professional gain. That was not criminal in the narrow legal sense, but it was the piece that would do the most specific, most irreversible damage to Liam Ashford in the one arena he most valued, his social standing. I had the audio recording from the balcony. I had recorded the rest of the call, or rather, I had let my phone do it for me. I'd had it running since month 2 of our relationship, a habit I'd developed years ago after a contractor dispute in which a verbal agreement was denied. I record significant conversations as a matter of professional routine, a detail I had never mentioned to Liam. The quality was not perfect, but it was sufficient. His voice was clear, the references were unambiguous, the laughter was unmistakable. I transferred the file. I sat with it for a moment. Then I made a phone call to the Harrington Foundation and confirmed my attendance and my contribution to their annual charity gala. Black tie, 300 of the city's most prominent figures in business, culture, and civic life. I told them I would be delighted to say a few words and that I had a small personal tribute I'd like to include. A video compilation, a kind of reflection on the year. Nothing long, just something I thought the room would find memorable. They were thrilled. They always are when I offer anything. The Harrington Foundation Gala is held every year in the Grand Ballroom of the Meridian Hotel. I've attended 6 times. I've always found it slightly exhausting. Too much performance, not enough substance, but it serves a function in the professional ecosystem, and I have always understood the importance of being present in the rooms that shape perception. Tonight, I understood it in a different way entirely. I arrived alone. I had told Liam I would be working late and would meet him there. He arrived 20 minutes after me. I watched him come through the door from across the room, watched him find me in the crowd with that practiced, confident scan of a man who has learned exactly how to enter a space. He was with Marcus Reeve. I had not known Marcus Reeve would be there. I had suspected it, hoped it if I'm honest. And there they were, together, as they should be for what I had planned. I smiled when Liam crossed the room to me. I let him kiss my cheek, I handed him a glass of champagne, and I told him he looked extraordinary. And he did. Liam is a genuinely beautiful man, and that was always the most disorienting thing about all of this. And I introduced him to a city councilor standing nearby, and I watched him work the room. I worked the room too. I spoke to a museum director about a commission. I congratulated a colleague on a recent award. I laughed at the right moments. I was present and gracious and entirely composed. And then the foundation director approached me and asked if I was ready. Ready. I had never been more ready for anything in my life. I stood at the podium and I looked out at the room, 300 faces, champagne flutes in hand, the particular soft light of a ballroom that has been designed to make everyone look their best. I found Liam's face in the crowd. He was smiling at me, that warm, proud smile of a partner watching someone they love take the room. And I looked at that smile and I thought of all the things I had believed when I first saw it. And I thought of what I now knew it was worth. And I spoke. Good evening. Thank you, Margaret, for that generous introduction. And thank you to the Harrington Foundation for another extraordinary evening in service of this city and its people. Before I say a few words about our collective work this year, I'd like to share something personal. Those who know me know that I am not, by nature, a man who tends towards sentiment in public. I'm an architect. I believe in structure, not in ornamentation. But this past year has taught me something about the importance of revealing what lies beneath a surface, of making visible what has been hidden. In honor of that lesson, I've prepared a brief tribute. This is dedicated to the people and the choices that shaped my year. Then, the ballroom's ambient sound shifts as a screen descends. A video begins. Soft music, images, architectural photography, city skylines, construction sites. Beautiful, tasteful. And then, very naturally, as if it were always meant to be part of the piece, the music fades, and a voice fills the ballroom. Liam's voice. Unmistakable, clear as a bell in the ballroom's acoustic perfection. Oh, no, he has no idea, Marcus. None. He thinks I'm in love with him. The man literally designed our bedroom. He designed it for me. Do you know how much that's worth? He's put my name on the guest list for every major architectural society event in the city. I've shaken hands with 3 city councilmen in the last 2 months because of him. That's the thing about Eli Voss, Marcus. Everyone always says he's untouchable, the ice architect, the man who doesn't let anyone in. You remember the bet, Ashford. Can't crack him. Nobody can. And here I am, 8 months in his bed and 6 months in his professional circles. Who's untouchable now? I stood at the podium. I did not look at Liam. I looked at the room. I looked at 300 faces in various stages of shock, recognition, and that particular alert stillness that falls over a crowd when it collectively understands it is witnessing something it will be talking about for years. I looked at Marcus Reeve. He had gone the color of old paste. And then, finally, I allowed myself one single steady glance in Liam's direction. He was standing very still, the champagne flute in his hand. The color had left his face. His mouth was slightly open. He looked, for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship, entirely unscripted. I spoke again, quietly, calmly, as though I were finishing a very ordinary professional observation. I want to acknowledge for the record that my firm has initiated a full legal review of the Harlow Riverside development in cooperation with the relevant regulatory authorities. Any stakeholders in this room with concerns about that project are encouraged to contact my attorney, Diane Park, whose details will be available at the door. I also want to assure my professional colleagues that every document bearing my signature or my firm's letterhead has been reviewed for integrity. I believe in building things that last. I have always believed that what you build on matters as much as what you build. Tonight seemed like the right moment to demonstrate that I still believe it. Thank you for your time. The silence holds for one more beat. Then a murmur begins, low, spreading, like water finding level. Somewhere a phone camera activates, then another. The murmur builds. I stepped away from the podium. I did not look back. I handed my champagne flute to a passing server. I walked across the ballroom, through the crowd that parted slightly, instinctively, the way crowds do for a person radiating something very focused and very still, and I collected my coat from the cloakroom, and I walked out of the Meridian Hotel through its front doors and into the night. Night Street. Traffic. Wind. The city breathing. Footsteps on pavement, measured, unhurried. The air outside was cold, that deep November cold that is not asking anymore. I stood on the pavement for a moment, and I breathed it in. Behind me, in the warm belly of the Meridian Hotel, 300 people were pulling out phones and calling lawyers and PR representatives and mutual contacts. Someone was probably already sending the recording to a journalist. The Harlow development story would be in legal proceedings by morning. Marcus Reeve's name was already in documents filed with the city's environmental oversight body. I had arranged that yesterday, a quiet submission, no fanfare, just facts and evidence presented to the people whose job it is to act on them. Liam Ashford's social credibility, the careful, calculated credibility he had built by leveraging my name and my reputation, had just been dismantled in approximately 4 minutes in front of everyone who had ever given him access to anything. In my line of work, we call what I just did a controlled demolition. You study the structure, you identify the load-bearing points, you place your charges precisely, and then you press the button and you step back and you let physics do what physics does. No mess, no screaming, No destruction of anything that should stand, just the clean, intentional removal of what should have never been built. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, that there was some blazing, cathartic satisfaction in that moment. There was something, but it wasn't triumph exactly. It was more like cessation, the end of something, the moment after a building comes down, when the dust settles and the site is cleared, and you are left standing in front of empty ground that is finally, genuinely empty. Neither sad nor glad about the emptiness, just clear about what it is and what it makes possible. Liam called my phone 7 times in the first 15 minutes. I watched the screen each time. I didn't answer, not because I was making a point. I was past making points. I simply had nothing to say to him that I hadn't already said, and far more publicly and precisely than any conversation between us could have managed. My attorney sent me a message. "Media inquiries already coming in. I've got it. You okay?" I replied, "More than okay." I put my phone in my pocket and kept walking. The sound of the city shifts, quieter now, further from the hotel, in the older part of the neighborhood where the streets are narrower and the light is different. Here is the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you. The worst part is never the betrayal itself. The worst part is the rewriting. The moment you realize that the story you have been living, the one you believed, the one you built your trust around, the one you let yourself need, was a fiction, and you have to go back through every moment of it and understand it differently. You have to watch yourself be deceived, scene by scene in retrospect, and you cannot protect the person you were from what was being done to them. That is the part that costs you something. I had let Liam see me, not just the professional, controlled, managed version of me that the world gets, but the actual interior of me. The person who is moved by a particular quality of winter light through glass. The person who still keeps his mother's first letter of encouragement in his desk drawer. The person who, yes, designed a bedroom with someone in mind because he thought that person was worth designing a room for. That person had been used, had been assessed for his value as a tool and found sufficient. And I will not pretend that doesn't leave a mark. It does. It will leave a mark for longer than I would like, probably. These things do. But here is what I also know. That person, the one who designs rooms for people he loves, who pays attention, who allows himself to feel things deeply and build from that depth, that person is not diminished by what Liam did with him. A beautiful building does not become less beautiful because someone tried to use it for a fraudulent purpose. The architecture is still true. The design is still sound. What Liam was betting against was an idea of me, the untouchable architect, the man who can't be reached. He thought he was the one who cracked that open. He wasn't. He only had access to me because I chose to open the door, and I can close it again, and I can open it again whenever I choose. That is mine. That has always been mine. That will remain mine regardless of anything Liam Ashford did or did not do with it. I am standing at the foot of a building I designed 6 years ago, the Voss Center. It is not my most famous building. It's not the one that gets photographed for magazine covers. It's a modest civic library in a neighborhood that needed one. 7 stories, glass and warm concrete, a reading garden on the 3rd floor, open to the sky. I designed it the year after my father died. I designed it thinking about what he would have wanted, a place of learning in a community that had been overlooked. I designed it for people I would never meet, who would use it for purposes I couldn't predict, who might never know my name. It is, I think, the best thing I have ever built. This is what I am. This is the thing Liam's bet was never about and could never have reached. This, the actual work, the meaning behind it, the version of myself that shows up in what I make rather than in what I allow people to see, this is untouchable. Not because I've closed it off, but because it belongs to something larger than what any one person can take. Liam Ashford was dropped by his consulting partners by 9 o'clock the following morning. His name was removed from the Harlow Project's public documentation by noon. Marcus Reeves' company was under formal investigation by the end of the week. 3 of the Harrington Gala's most prominent attendees had issued public statements distancing themselves from both men by the following Monday. The recording went everywhere. Of course it did. It always does these days. A voice in a ballroom travels faster than light when 300 phones are in the room. I gave one statement through Diane's office, confirming the legal proceedings and reaffirming my firm's commitment to ethical practice. I did not speak to journalists. I did not speak to Liam. I did not, to be very clear, speak to anyone about the personal dimensions of what had happened, not because I was ashamed, but because it was private. What had been done to me was not a public spectacle. What I had done in response was necessarily visible, but the wound and the healing of the wound, those were mine alone. I had Liam's belongings packed and arranged for collection within 72 hours of the gala. Professional, efficient, impersonal. I left him a note, one line, not cruel, just clear. I know what I'm worth. I hope someday you find out what you're worth without borrowing from someone else.
The end.